In this real side experience, I would find myself attending a class. Generally, on the real side, our intention to continue with our processes of awareness can be represented as our being in a classroom settings, whereas we progress through the schooling like tiers. Symbolically, we are becoming more aware. We are releasing agreement and attachment to the consciousness, which has us liberated more so from the limitation that it is. For we all are this everything isness awareness, but through the created consciousness and the full absorption into its construct, as we all will be, until the intent to recognize the is established with the personal self. The true reality, our real awareness selves, will be as though obscured beneath the filters of our creation. Really, then, we are not progressing or advancing as ideas. We are this real awareness already. We are removing that, our attachment to the consciousness construct, which holds us from our true beingness selves. And then would be the next step of recognizing the that the real awareness we now are standing as is a part of. In this case, however, I was being afforded a physical level earth potentiality, and really then, as this was set to be a global situation, I could have been present in any earth scene or situation. On occasion, we may have experiences where we are viewing through the consciousness-affected body forms of a participant to what is taking place. For as the real awareness, which we each actually are, is a part of the isness, everything reality, really then, each body form is affording a view for the same overall true reality. And only from the personal perspective is the consideration of segregation, that this is my body form, and these are my situations and lifetimes, and so we can experience real side affected situations through the eyes of others, etc. This wouldn't be the case, however, in this real side experience. I was simply inserted into this potential future view occurrence in this capacity, operating in a random school type setting, that although perhaps I was not set to actually feature in this potential event, as I am less likely to have the agreements as most of humanity will a consciousness harbour, that will affect myself in this overall humanity shared experience, as through my process of awareness are the agreements of the consciousness being released, that I am less restricted and resigned to that which humans, fully embracing of their consciousnesses, will be. Nevertheless, here I was, as though an additional and unexpected extra to a movie, that although isn't scripted in or effected in, here I was, that I could bear witness to what would unfold. No impressions would reveal as to the source of the agreements that had become overall human consciousness inserted, that such a situation could be effected, but very likely it was a dark force created idea, and through whichever mechanism had they installed it. The idea agreement would now nestle among all others that are present in human consciousness, and although all agreements are in effect now in isness reality terms, consciousness design dictates the processing of these idea causes to their effects as having a delay factor, through the inclusion of time and space ideas. And it is so that only the agreement that is at the forefront, that which is held to most prominently, will become a physical level manifest, but only if held to long enough that this be so, or it would be the equivalent of switching the movie before reaching the end. The movie, although complete on the disc, must however be processed through the apparatus and rolled out from start to finish. This event would be one such a possibility, and it would proceed as follows: that it was as though a particular distortion had taken place within the consciousnesses of a certain percentage of the human population. I would have said approximately 10% of humanity. For the human consciousness overall is constructed as agreement to the dark forces, that control and subjugation is the foundation of the human experience, but in order that additional situations can befall humanity, so these are additional idea agreements that must be consciousness installed. The dark forces either must successfully implant these additional ideas that their agendas can proceed to roll out, or are subjected to the parameters of the agreements, the particulars already in place, and it seemed that 10% or so of humans had within their consciousnesses the agreements that they could be impacted in a way that the vast majority of humans could not. For even though unconscious of what would transpire, that they had such agreements that would effect as a somewhat different circumstances for themselves than the bulk of humanity, they were in fact unwitting conduits for other ill-intended beings, as though their particular agreements, the 10%, facilitated the means by which they could be possessed by beings that would serve the dark forces' purposes of depopulation, as this is the dark forces' current desire, to depopulate by whichever means possible, and keen are they to install all manner of agreements effecting various events and scenarios where this may be so, many of which I have been shown and shared over the years, and then it's according to which agreement takes a prominence and is maintained long enough to become a physical level manifested. So really, the more agreements of a depopulation nature the dark forces can insert into a human consciousness, the more likely one of them will become so, and this particular agreement was as good a mechanism of depopulation as any other. For by whatever means the 10% had agreements secured with these ill-intended beings that allowed them to possess them, and wherever it was creationally the ill-intended possessing beings hailed from, very likely the lower astral, what would follow globally would be that the 10% of humanity would suddenly lose control of their idea-generating body form mechanics, as they would be usurped and taken over by these ill-intended beings, a little like being locked out of your own computer and another individual is able to control that which is manifested on the screen, and all the personal self-awareness can do is sit and watch as its body form is puppeteered, as though a prisoner in one's own externally controlled vehicle. And not only would these ill-intended beings then have control of the human body forms of the 10%, but the distortion that these beings was to the extent that the body forms they were possessing would warp and change and become something entirely different. The human body type would give way to a kind of spongy, gelatinous mass, but one that somewhat floated several feet from the ground like a cloud. As I said, this represented a depopulation idea potentiality, for with 10% of humans possessed and their body forms restructured as these spongy floating masses, so the ill-intended beings that animated through them would then attack all humans who hadn't been possessed and transformed. For direct contact with these gelatinous masses, and the human body form would be absorbed into them and effectively destroyed. In the classroom I was operating within, so the teacher would be among the 10% thus afflicted, her body form possessed and transformed into an amorphous floating blob, and the ill-intended being animating through the form would now proceed to absorb the entirety of the class. For the blob creatures could move very swiftly, easily outpacing the fastest human, and in such an enclosed setting as the classroom presented as, impossible would escape be for the humans in attendance. The absorption process of each human very efficient also, that the blob creature could then attack targets in rapid succession. This would be a global happening, as I said, 10% of the populations of every country becoming, as these are transformed and ill-intended being controlled blob-like body forms, and although I wouldn't be shown the extent of the destruction, it surely was a very effective mechanism of depopulation. Ultimately, if drawn to a conclusion, no human body forms would remain, and only those altered into the blobs would be present, and perhaps from there the dark force controllers would instigate whatever further ideas they intended for an Earth now a derelict of all humanity. But as I said, this event remains only as a potentiality. This and ideas of a similar depopulation nature are agreements present in human consciousness, and although all are in effect now in actuality, that which becomes overall human experience depends on which are retained as the forerunning agreements long enough to process through and become a physical level actualized. In an unrelated scene that followed, the theme would be in regards to the developing of psychic science-like capability for all nufriends on the physical level. For indeed, I shared a real side experience many months ago where an aware being would be addressing all nufriends. Present also would be real guides, and she would speak of how, as we continue with our awareness processes, as this entails a facing and releasing of all idea agreements of the consciousness, we will become progressively more capable, not just on the real side, but on the physical level also. For everything we experience on the physical, in regards to limitations, these are agreements which effect as that which limits the physical form. The inability to fly, for example, or say, change one's form at will. In reality, if I have no agreements held to, I am no longer the effects of any idea, unless I consciously decide this is so, and now there is no limit to how I can operate in creation multi-dimensionally and including the physical level. That this is expressed on the real side, an awareness process of idea limitation releasing, which has us increasingly more indomitable, instantaneously so, as everything will be on the real side, but the gradual processing of our intents agreements and consciousness agreement releasing will have the effects eventually becoming a physical level manifest, that although our consciousness facing and releasing will not yield immediate physical level results, as on the real side, the woman addressing the group did stress that at some point this will process through, and on the physical then will be a means of heightened survival. For as I said, we will be utilizing as though more so the psychic science aspects of our created selves, able to manipulate our simulated physical experience and our body forms as we see fit, by virtue of releasing the idea agreements that limit such a capability. Of course, we need endeavour to not be over-consumed with the abilities that will naturally unlock as the awareness process unfolds, for any idea, even if beneficial and affording a greater survivability, can be creationally binding if we attach to it, and all too easy is it to lose the overall focus and intent with the years, and that it be replaced with the thrill of harnessing such psychic science skills, etc., that nothing is negated, but we must retain always indifference to all ideas of a creation, to see them all as the fabricated unrealities they actually are, and in reality all ideas are serving only as comparisons to recognize the is by, as is the purpose of the simulators, and every idea effecting a circumstance created within them. For indeed, I would find myself in an open environment amongst a large number of what impressions revealed as being those on their awareness processes, an awareness process which would have the limitations the consciousness comprised of gradually released, and where eventually on the physical would we all become somewhat more unlimited consequently, and we had as though afforded to us a real side position where we could practice the abilities we would unlock and learn to become more disciplined in their utilization. For as you can imagine, such limitlessness of experiential manipulation could serve beneficially, but potentially destructively also, if not utilized responsibly. For indeed, we would be assuming all manner of various body types, visually presenting as us entering a kind of null space devoid of anything, and where through our imagination would alternative forms be made available, we then would assume, and be returned to the environmental setting with the newly acquired body types, and whatever abilities, skills and attributes such forms also possessed. And we would as though duel with each other, a little like the computer games, but where, despite blasting each other with the fireballs, lightning strikes, and various other supernatural, magical type powers, we were bestowing no harm upon each other, as though we were children delighting in our new toys, but as we had no ill intentions toward each other, so this would not effect as the bestowing of injury. I was rather entertaining myself by assuming a number of dragonic body types, forms of a more mythological nature, and all this was taking place under the watchful eye of individuals that impressions revealed were real guides. As I said, we were just practicing and becoming accustomed to the very real physical level possibility that we would be able to alter form at will and have a greater survivability through the capabilities we could then marshal. For who knows how the earth will be as the years proceed, the first seen and potential overall human experience, just one example, a possibility among others. If the controllers get their way, or rather get the humans to agree to their own depopulation, etc., and where such abilities then may be required, if we even are to remain on the earth as such dark force instigated events occur. Although, in a scene that then followed, I would find that I had been captured by expressions of the dark forces, that although a real side experience, it was a somewhat of a heads up and warning as to being a potential physical level situation, as though, as the nufriends do begin to unlock such a capability, as they release the agreement limitations of the consciousness, that the dark forces are watching all our activities and developments, real side and physical level, therein lies the possibility of the nufriends being physical level captured by the dark forces as a means of containment, or perhaps a study. For in this case, so I had developed my physical level capabilities to an extent that although I wasn't limitless, my experience manipulative ability was enough that it had drawn the attentions of the ever-watching darker forces. They had kidnapped me on the physical and contained me in a facility that I could be studied, rather similar to a real side experience I shared months ago along similar lines of being imbued with a physical level ability through the awareness process of consciousness facing and releasing, and where I also was contained in a dark force facility, as though this real side experience was another reminder and warning of this possibility. In this case and physical level potential future situation, I wasn't simply contained, but as I said, the various dark force representing scientists were keen to study me and encourage me as to my simulation manipulation, to see what I was capable of. I would as though play along with this, for I had ability to an extent, but not enough had filtered through to the physical as yet that my capture could be prevented or my escape be made possible, and so I would do as they requested, making alterations to the environments within the facility as they desired. But came a point whereafter I had been retained in the facility for what seemed as months, as my more so unlimited capabilities on the real side were continuing to filter through and be exacted on the physical level and body form, so I became unmanageable and uncontainable, able to effect my extrication from their clutches, reminding me a little of the movie Lucy, whereas she unlocked her unlimited capability, she rendered herself untouchable. As I said, this was a heads-up warning of what we may expect as we do unlock such capabilities, the very real possibility of drawing the attentions of the dark forces, and where they may be motivated to destroy or contain us, or, as in this experience, to hold us for study. Everything we decide and choose will render effects we have to deal with, as is the nature of cause and effect agitation providing a creation. But regardless of the experiences, as we affect situations and circumstances through the awareness process we continue with, as it does entail a facing of all of creation, and with the certain ideas we take on, including us becoming potentially able to operate on the physical as we do on the real side, where we can manipulate the experiential environment we are in as we see fit. All of this is very secondary to the recognition of the ears. And regardless then as to what transpires in the unreality fabrication of the simulators, ultimately its only worth is as comparison to recognize the ears from, and we just utilize creation as we do for our ears presenting and sharing purposes, but we are not resigned to it through ideas we cling to emotionally.